Hey everyone, my name is Dave Nixon and welcome back to another episode of the Peak and Flow podcast. This is yet again another installment in the BSFT30 series, and today we're going to be talking about an introduction to cold exposure. And the reason why I call it an introduction to cold exposure is because it's an acronym for ice bath. Yeah, I'm pretty exciting. So let's get stuck straight into it because there's a lot of stuff out there when it comes to cold exposure. And there's different camps to fall into for sure. And my goal here today isn't to influence to be in any particular camp, but to encourage a critical thought and also personal experiment for what really works for individuals and of course to do your own research. But we're going to come at it from a couple of different angles and points of view. And really those that will benefit mostly from this episode is, well, one, if people absolutely hate the cold, which is what I used to absolutely hate the cold. And my relationship with cold and the cold, especially being in Canberra, which does get into, gets right down to -8 with zero snow. So it's not even like the exciting stuff. It just gets cold. Has completely and fundamentally changed, and I can absolutely tie it down to my approach to cold exposure for sure. There's those individuals. It's also the other individuals that are kind of they're interested, but they don't know where to start, and they want to make sure they're actually optimizing their approach to cold exposure rather than just joining the cowboy revolution on Instagram and posting their cold exposure and hating it all the way. And you'll see as I go through, if you have two people in there for the same length of time, but one person is absolutely hating it, but one person is able to down-regulate, is that the same cold exposure experience? Probably not. So one of the key things here, and one of the things that I have seen over time, is people that just kind of get pushed. I'll give you a quick example. People that get pushed to just do it, especially for physical, muscular recovery purposes. A good friend of mine was a really high profile. He made it to the top level of cricket, and he, through all of his sporting career, was kind of forced to do X period of length of time in the ice bath for recovery. And he ended up hating it. And we've done some cold exposure since, and he still has the same, literally visceral response to cold exposure that he had back then as well. And a lot of the time it was kind of, the broccoli was forced on him, so to speak. So let's move away from that, from hating it to understanding it and how to use it. And that's really what today's about. So a couple of key principles to lean on. And I'm going to start with one that actually comes up a bit with most of the cold exposure that I deliver. And if for first timers they go, well, the ice bath gives me, I get anxious, the ice bath gives me anxiety, I'm worried about X, Y, Z. And as silly as it sounds, the ice bath cannot give you anxiety because there is no anxiety in the ice bath. Now, I know that's very simple. In the same way the gym can't give you anxiety, you might get anxious when you think about going to the gym, or you might get anxious when you think about the ice bath, but it's not the ice bath or the gym that's giving that to you. And have you ever felt anxious about something like going to the gym and you did it anyway, and then after 3, 4, 5 months, you no longer have that feeling no longer arises for you? Is it because the gym or the ice bath ran out of anxiety? Probably not. So that's actually occurring within us, and it's information. It's telling us something, and it's usually mapped across our meaning making more than anything, but it's also associated with how we're physically feeling and how we're physically showing up. So there's definitely a visceral physical response. And so if I'm getting anxious about the ice bath, then I can actually use the ice bath as a mirror and understand, okay, what's going on for me to make myself, and how I'm making myself anxious about this, rather than just simply handing that power over, which I've talked at lengths throughout this program. If I say the ice bath gives me anxiety, I'm absolutely powerless, right? So the key thing here is going, okay, why am I getting anxious about this? What am I actually concerned about? And you follow that road and we come to a completely different position. So the ice bath is a mirror, and I'll give you an example. So let's say, have you ever been to the gym and let's say you're comfortable with deadlifts? Maybe it's not, maybe there's a different example for you, but you're going to say you're comfortable with deadlifts and you're comfortable deadlifting 60 kilograms or 100 kilograms or whatever it is. And as you're warming up, one day you're comfortable lifting 60 kilograms, you get to 60 kilograms and you pick it up and you're like, oh, it's really easy today. You're like, did I get the numbers wrong? You step back and you have a look and you're like, no, that's right. I'm feeling strong today. That's really easy today. Then there's other days you rock up and you put on 60 kilos and you go to lift it and you're like, oh, did I get this wrong? And you step back, you're like, man, that feels heavy today. That is still 60 kilograms. The weight didn't change. What changed was you. And so in the same way that training can give you a mirror to what's really going on for you, and this speaks to the concept of RPI, the ice bath can also give you an indication of what's really going on for you. And you can use it as a mirror to understand yourself, because the biggest mistake people can often make when it comes to breath work, people also make when it comes to something like cold exposure. And that is this, and I heard this from Shift Adapt, Brian McKenzie. He said one of the biggest mistakes people make when it comes to breath work is they use it to change their state rather than using it to understand their state. And the same is said for ice baths. Often people go, I'm going to use this to change my state, change my physiology. That's great. Good job. You're also missing out on the real juices, which is understanding why am I here. So it gives you an indication. So if you've got friction there when thinking about doing breath work or an ice bath or going to the gym, it may be worth leaning into that. Friction is very different to a threat. So you've got to be really attuned to understanding what that is for you. Yet when we see that, it's actually using the ice bath to understand ourselves better and what's really going on for us. And an interesting thing from my experience in working with other people, loads of other people, is that the ice bath becomes harder with the more stress that we have outside of the ice bath and how we're either handling that or not handling that. And so this whole idea of the body keeps a score, if you're familiar with that or familiar with the book, it is this kind of thing that we are going to, let's call it storing certain, I'm going to say energy. And when I say energy, I want you to think about emotions being energy in motion. So it's energy moving through your body. And if you don't actually express that energy, then it will get stored somewhere. And then you put yourself in a position like the ice bath where you're actually having to sit with it and this stimulus, then usually that energy wants to go and wants to get out somehow. And so this is where using things like the ice bath can be really interesting and really beneficial for more than just what the scientific facts will tell you about muscle recovery or dulling the effects of actual physical training. So there's some really interesting aspects of that. But done well, it should be used as a mirror. So which kind of leads us to this whole important point of that when we're looking at cold exposure, it's mind and matter. Now, I've spoken about it before, but it's mind and matter. So it's actually understanding how am I showing up in mind and how am I showing up in body to get, to actually experience this ice bath, to approach the ice bath, to actually through the experience and afterwards. So it's not mind over matter, it's mind and matter. And that's a really, really important point, and one that will serve you 100% as you move through that. And we're going to talk about that a bit later on. So the reason why that's also important is because we actually want to approach something like, we want to approach a lot of things like this, but cold exposure by going, what is an adequate stimulus? And it's such a boring term, but it's a very important term. What is an adequate stimulus for where I'm at today, for what's going to stretch me, not break me? Now, when we look at stimulus, we could think of the temperature, we could think of the length of time, we could think of the total volume of body that's being submerged, we could think of whether it's running water out in the open with people, like all of this is stimulus. So what is an adequate stimulus for what I'm working on and what I'm trying to achieve out of getting this ice bath today? And we do that by balancing ability and challenge. So this is looking at Mihei Csikszentmihalyi's work on flow. For those watching online, that's this book here is an example of his work, but he's done extensive work. And so Mihei Csikszentmihalyi, I've had to YouTube his name multiple times to find out to make sure I was saying it right, and that's the best one I landed on. But he came out with this flow graph or flow chart, and basically what we're doing is we're balancing challenge and stimulus. If we have too much stimulus and low challenge, then we feel overwhelmed, commonly anxiety, overwhelm, things of that nature. If we have too much skill and not enough challenge, then it becomes boredom. And so real states of flow and real engagement is when we're balancing ability and challenge, right? So skills and ability and challenge. And so we actually want to take that same sort of lens when we're looking at something like cold exposure. So like I mentioned before about mind and matter, it's easy to go, it's mind over matter, or you just, you silence the mind and just get on with it, or whatever the case might be, you fight it. Sort of. The approach that I want to offer you is that once again, it is mind and matter, but we also still need to count and consider the actual environment plays a significant role, and so does the actual community or the culture or the shared values and shared meaning that people around you as well. So you've got a couple of different examples where it's a breath workshop or similar, and we've got these plastic tubs that we fill with ice from the shop. This experience with everyone, let's say, rah-rahing and music pumping, and you're going to get to 3 minutes, and yes, well done, high fives, nothing wrong with it whatsoever at all. But that 3 minutes is going to be very different to somebody getting into a calm river, nice flowing calm river that it's got no ice in it, but it comes from a very cold environment with individuals that are actually all going through it at the same time with no music but nature sounds. There's massive differences in those two examples, and both are useful and both serve a purpose. It's just a matter of going that the mind, body, environment, and the community all play a role in how we actually approach our cold exposure. Now, I think Huberman, if you enjoy any of his content, he's done a fair bit on cold exposure, and I know that he's been pushed into the corner time and time again, and he comes up with the answer of like 11 minutes of cold exposure a week. Is that a cold shower? Is that an ice bath? Is it a controlled temperature ice bath? Is it natural water? Because there's going to be so many different minerals coming out of natural water on a river compared to that of a plastic ice bath with ice from a service station. Like, there's these kind of variances that play a role, but really we're looking at 11 minutes of cold exposure per week is the number he lands on. And you could easily tie that down to 3 minutes per session a couple of times a week. So that'd be 4 approximately, but the other thing around it is that you got to be like, what am I doing this for? Why am I approaching it this way? And so then when we look at our mind, our actual pre-intention is crucial. Like, what is this for? Why am I doing it? And what's my personal focus? So what is my intention? One of the biggest things that it comes online for cold exposure, as you're in it, if you're going through it, is literally accepting. The word that can commonly come up is a word called surrendering. And what surrendering means is to let go, but take that further again, it means to let be and to accept. And if you're able to allow yourself to do that in mind, because it is just cold water, so it's just cold sensation on the body, that's all it is, we make it more than that. So if you allow it to be that, you can fundamentally shift your whole experience when it comes to cold exposure. It's really, really important. And then being able to observe what comes up, because it really is a mirror, is an exercise that will show you what's going on for you. And my guess is under certain other stresses around life, it'll show up in a very similar way. So that's why it's a mirror, that's the usefulness of it. When it comes to the body, it is common when you get into a cold water, you have this response of going, get the fuck out of the cold water, because for a very long period of time, if you fell into, so this is why it's called deliberate cold exposure compared to non-deliberate cold exposure. If you fell into a lake, then it's probably a pretty negative type experience compared to someone consciously choosing to go into a cold body of water to be able to calm their nervous system and work on their breath. Two very different things, yet the temperature of the water might be identical. So there's a joke around the Titanic and how like Jack might have been like, he would have been calm as hell. He would have been clear, focused, because he was in cold water. So a little bit different, but the point there being is that the intention and body, and actually what we would suggest with this is some breath cycles. Now, put the breath cycles in the playbook. The ones that we recommend to just have a framework to lean on to begin with is that when you get in, you're going to go through 10 breaths with the goal of lengthening your breath out and a nice long breath out. So even if it's you get in there, it's like ooh, ooh, because you put your body into really a fight or flight, a sympathetic response is to then help down regulate. And we do that with two main things with our breath. One is moving from breathing from the mouth to breathing through the nose, especially breathing out through the nose. And two is actually elongating your breath out. If you want to hack for this, not that I'm all for hacks, but if you want to hack for this, you hum on your way out, and that will help. Let's use it. I'm going to use the term massage, but it's not quite the same, but I'm going to use it. It's going to help massage the vagus nerve, which will allow you to down-regulate faster, really drop in. And so your ability, because this is where it comes in, if someone's in there for 3 minutes and they're fighting and they've got fierce and doing this, and they're in there for 3 minutes, clap, get out, off you go, compared to someone that gets in and they're able to then really down-regulate their nervous system in 30 seconds and then sort of allow themselves to accept and relax for the next 2.5, that's not the same experience. So somebody that's able to get into that and really down-regulate nice and quick, using the breath, being accepting, and being able to allow themselves to release tension and surrender is a really powerful way to be able to use your ice baths. From that, when you get out of the ice bath, commonly people want to then warm up straight away. So they either get a towel or something similar and they might be doing, if you're seeing once again online, if you're watching this, they're doing this sort of like standing and shaking sort of thing, or they're trying to have a hot shower, or they get into a hot sauna. The difficulty with that is that when you're in cold for long enough, you've got this like thermostat in your body, and what it's going to do is recognize that you're really cold, so it's going to attempt to heat up your core temperature. But if you're in there long enough, it's actually going to drop your core temperature a little bit. And then when you get out, if you get straight into an external source of heat, what's going to happen is that your body's going to go, hey, you're really hot because I can feel the heat on the outside, and it's going to drop you even further, and that's where people get into drop your core temperature, that is, even further. And that's where people get into a lot of trouble. So really important things there of making sure that when you get out of the ice bath or any form of cold exposure, that you get moving and breathing. And so in that circumstance, and actually moving, I've seen boxers do shadow sparring. I've seen other individuals sort of do some form of like Tai Chi. There's plenty of different variations of what you can do, but get moving, get breathing so that your body can warm up naturally after. And that's one of the key things of how we get a lot of the benefits when we look at cold exposure, is allowing our nervous system and our immune system to adapt to the stimulus that we're giving it, rather than just trying to get all this external source of heat straight away. So a couple of key things with the factors. I already mentioned there's a couple of key differences, but if you have a running water, then it's always going to feel colder than still water. And one of the main reasons for that is because in a still water, you can stay still and your body will sort of get these little air bubbles on top, and that's basically a thermal layer. If you go to move or you're in moving water, then you never get a chance to build that thermal layer. So it's constantly a different experience on the skin. So that's one. Your natural water compared to water out of the tap is going to be different as well. Neither's good nor bad. It's what you have access to. But if you can get into natural water, I would highly encourage it, because it's what our ancestors did for a very, very long period of time. It's very healthy for you. On that note as well, the individuals, so the community, the communication, the support, making sure that's all clear and not assumed is very important as well. So the people that you do that with, having everyone on the same page is absolutely crucial. So taking on this, and there's a fair bit there, but those 10 breath cycles I'm going to come back to again, because what I would encourage you to do as you go through and sit in the cold exposure is that you go through 10 breath cycles with the goal of lengthening your breath out. So like I said before, it can start with ooh, ooh, and then being able to ooh, and really lengthen that breath out, and do your best to bring it to nasal or humming at least. And you work for 10 breath cycles, and on the bottom of your 10th breath, so on the end of the exhale of your 10th, you do a breath hold. Now you do a breath hold until you feel what's called a medium air hunger, right? Even a low air hunger is fine. So your low air hunger is your brain going, hey, you're normally breathing, you're not breathing, you should be breathing. A medium air hunger is your body actually having involuntary contractions, whether it be in your chest or your throat, wanting to breathe. That's when you want to start breathing again, because when you do start breathing again, you don't want it to be this, it should just be, especially in water, don't pass out. It should just be this, and then you go through. So you start with something like 2 cycles, 10 breaths, medium breath hold, another breath cycle, medium breath hold. And then after that second breath cycle, you check in with yourself. You're like, now that I'm here, am I willing to do another 1 or 2? And if so, then you go for another 1 or 2. And so really we're shifting the attention away from the time, although I would encourage you to time this, is to actually you're basing it upon down regulating your nervous system with your breath cycles. And what I would suggest is that you give yourself a chance to go, okay, well, how long is this taking me to do this within this cold water, rather than I'm in here for 3 minutes and hating it. So that's the breath cycles. That's what I'd highly recommend to begin with. So you've got something to focus on that's outside of the time and the cold. You've actually got your breath, the presence, and all that to begin with. In your breath holds, the last thing I'd mention on that is if you allow yourself to just let go and let all the tension go and surrender to what is, it's going to be crucial for you to be able to get the most out of that experience and really get like the overarching benefits from cold exposure. In doing so, you lean into the anxiousness, into the friction. You end up meeting it where you're at, and you're doing it for your reasons and your benefit. So you become the experiment, and you use it as a self-regulation tool and an anchoring tool and a check-in tool, rather than using it in a way to just tick a box in the morning or because everyone else is doing it. And on that, team, I'm done. Thank you very much for tuning in. If you enjoyed this podcast, it would mean a world to me if you pass on to someone else that you think would also benefit from it. If you haven't heard or learned about our BSFT30, you can do so in the show notes below. And you can find out about our peak and flow immersions there as well. That's me done. I'm out. Until next time, peace and pizza. I'll see you soon.